think about who they're building around. Sengun, who is somehow 22 years old. That feels wrong, but he is. Tari Eason, you just mentioned, is 23 years old. Jalen Green is still 22 years old. Jabari Smith Jr. is 21 years old. Cam Whitmore is 20 years old. Reed Shepherd, who we've seen very little of, both you and I have been extremely high on Reed Shepherd and his future in the NBA, 20 years old. This is a crazy, crazy foundation to have moving forward, given how good they are already right now. This is Hot Hand Theory. This is a podcast where we talk about the NBA and break things down from an analytical perspective. I'm your co-host, XJ. As always, I'm joined by my brilliant co-host, Geoff. Geoff, the Houston Rockets. We have to talk about Houston. This team is refusing to go away. There are a lot of people who were expecting this team to fade down the stretch. You know, it's like, oh yeah, cool, they got off to this hot start, but you know, it's getting near playoff time. You could see yourself out now. Amen Thompson has got hurt. All right, you guys can, that's the end of you guys. But they only seem to be getting stronger. Now red hot, fighting for that number 2 spot in the Western Conference, which, side note, Geoff, the number 2 spot in the Western Conference gets you potentially a nice first round matchup with the Clippers with Kawhi, or the Warriors with Jimmy Butler, or the Timberwolves that literally do not miss shots. So good luck to all those Western Conference competitors. But regardless, this Rockets team is on fire, and of late they've been doing it without Amen Thompson, with Fred VanVleet working his way back from injury. He's been somewhat up and down. The majority of the guys in their rotation have missed time here and there, and the Rockets just will not fade. The second best defense in the league, according to Cleaning the Glass, with a 110.2 defensive rating. And in the last weeks, they have a plus 16 per 100 possession point differential, including the number 1 defense and the number 2 offense. What the hell is going on in Houston, Geoff? How do we explain this?
There's so many fascinating angles with this team, and we're going to cover at least a few of them here. I know where you want to start, so I'm not going to step on your toes. I'm just going to give a quick shout out here. Ime Udoka has been everything they hoped he would be in Houston. He's an awesome coach, and it's one of those things where when I look at Houston, I try to put myself in the shoes of a Houston Rockets fan, and I just think about how they had those rough couple seasons there after James Harden was traded away to the Nets. And it just sort of seemed like they were directionless. Remember, they got John Wall, and it was like, oh, John Wall's going to come be the new James Harden. And there are all these weird – they were just in this really weird spot, and it just seemed like they so went all in trying to surround James Harden with the right pieces to win a championship. Surely it had to take a while for this rebuild to occur. And it's not even like they super nailed any of these draft picks. Like, I'm not saying they drafted bad or anything. I think they have a number of really good draft picks. But I'm saying they weren't handed like a Victor Wembanyama or anything like that. They've just sort of made solid moves. And then they get this guy in Ime Udoka, who is simultaneously a coach who is going to raise the floor, is going to demand certain things, is going to instill defensive principles that you want in a young team. Remember, actually, we had that clip early on in Hot Hand Theory. I think it was like a month or two into our podcast existence. And we tweeted out Tari Eason trying to take the technical free throw.
That's an all-time clip.
It's an all-time clip. Because Tari Eason was on the old Rockets. I feel like that sums up where they're at right now. Like, Tari Eason played for those Rockets, those directionless Rockets. He gets a flagrant foul drawn, and he's like, I'm taking this fucking free throw. I'm walking to the line. And Fred VanVleet is literally just like, get out of here, dude. What are you doing? Like, you're not taking this shit. And look, I mean, this is just a totally new team. And we're going to get into a lot of data about how impressive this defense has been, some questions, but just overall the vibes are so strong. And it's just such an exciting time to be a Rockets fan. They're a young team. They have a really, really positive direction with a good coach. And if you're a Rockets fan out there, I would just be thrilled at where you're at, almost regardless. Like, I'm sure that's easy to say now. I'm sure if they're the 2 seed and they lose to a 7 seed, that's going to be a tough thing to swallow. But like you alluded to, it's like, dude, they're going to be a 2 seed and they're going to play a top 10 team in the league almost assuredly. That's, and they could win that series. I'm not saying they can't win that series. I'm just overall trying to paint a picture that this is a great time to be a Rockets fan.
I love when you give like the contemporary kind of historical backdrop of everything to kind of set the context, and I think it's so important to think about it in that way because, I mean, to me, I don't know how Rockets fans think or how they feel, but I think the Rockets are ahead of schedule right now, and like easily so. Think about their core. Like obviously they have Fred VanVleet, who is 30 years old, unclear whether, whether he'll be back next year, like in terms of them kind of dealing him. I think he's going to be in his final year of his contract. But he's 30 years old, and that's basically the guy who, I mean, Dylan Brooks, obviously 28 as well, but I don't really see Dylan Brooks as like such a key piece to their future. So aside from those two guys, think about who they're building around. Sengun, who is somehow 22 years old. That feels wrong, but he is. Tari Eason, you just mentioned, is 23 years old. Jalen Green is still 22 years old. Jabari Smith Jr. is 21 years old. Cam Whitmore is 20 years old. Reed Shepherd, who we've seen very little of, both you and I have been extremely high on Reed Shepherd and his future in the NBA, 20 years old. This is a crazy, crazy foundation to have moving forward, given how good they are already right now. And you could imagine, Fred VanVleet, obviously a key part of their team this year and has been, but I don't think irreplaceable, given the kind of core of the pieces that are surrounding him.
Yeah, especially
yeah.
actually if they plan to keep Jalen Green. Like
Right.
I don't mean that presumptuously, like, oh, I expect to trade. I'm just saying, like, because they have to like what Jalen Green's been showing them offensively recently. Once again, he's near the top of the league in offensive EPM. He's growing as a player, even if some people, and I'm sure some people would expect you and I to think this way, being more data inclined and more analytically inclined. There are a lot of people who just aren't going to let themselves like Jalen Green until he is just unequivocally this super good player, but it's like he's still so young. But my point is that if Jalen Green's here to stay, I think replacing VanVleet is going to be actually easier than the data might suggest, because what they want from a point guard is a more additive piece, someone who can shoot and defend next to Jalen Green. They don't really need another ball handler.
Yep. It's such a great point. I totally agree. And so given that kind of context, it's not like you have to go out and get this superstar point guard like you're suggesting. Like you can get a guy who is sort of a 3-and-D type of point guard, and you'd be really well set given their defensive backdrop already. So I totally agree with that. And yeah, just that youth on the team, I think, is so essential and has to be factored into the context. I'm not a person who believes that, a young team can't do well in the playoffs because they need to get that experience and take a big loss in the playoffs in order to, I don't believe that. I think there's a little bit of conflation there that happens where it's like maybe young teams don't go as far in the playoffs because they're earlier in their career and they're not that good yet. So it's not really about not having the experience, but just not being the actualized version of what they're going to be. But I do think this Rockets team is going to be a problem for literally anybody in the Western Conference. And this is with their best player being a 22-year-old Alperen Sengun, who is the guy that you kind of alluded to that I wanted to talk about. And I really want to talk about him. And there's a couple other angles, like you mentioned, to talk about the Rockets from. But to me, it does start with Sengun, because I just think that he has such obvious strengths that people notice, and that when you think about Sengun, you think about his playmaking, you think about his elite rebounding, like an unbelievable rebounder. He genuinely does come across to be like a pre-evolved state Jokic, and I know that's like it's cliche at this point. He's like Charmeleon Jokic at this, like right before, he's not Charizard, but he's right there. And I agree with that. I think that he's really gifted in that way. He can create plays with his gravity near the rim. He has this full array of spins and finishes, and his passing as a playmaker is awesome, especially at his position. The one thing he doesn't have is the 3-point shooting, which I do think will come along for him at some point. But watching back Sengun film and watching back Rockets games, something I think is really special about Sengun in particular, at least right now, is like his overall balance, understanding of the balance of the court. And I think this is relevant for both ends. Like, people would be really shocked to know that the defensive impact metrics love Sengun. Like, the defensive impact metrics suggest that his defensive impact is as high as his offensive impact. Yep. That is sort of hard to believe if you know Sengun's reputation. But I do think
it's counterintuitive for sure.
Totally counterintuitive. But I do think he just has this deep understanding of how defenses bend and shade and how things kind of flow from strong side to weak side. And I think that gives him an advantage on both ends of the court. So I'll just take a step back. I'm going to just do a little like kind of explanation just to make sure that everybody can kind of get what I'm at least envisioning. When the ball is on one side of the court, we consider that the strong side. And obviously the side that the ball is not on, we consider that the weak side. In the vast majority of circumstances, right, everyone is not just like matching up with their players defensively, like just attached to them. Like, you know, we see defenses, guys on the weak side of the court shading towards the strong side because that's where the immediate threat is. They want to make it more difficult for the ball to get to the rim and, you know, for there to be super easy opportunities to score. And by showing more players, it clogs things up more. And Geoff, they can get away with it because it's not like you could just teleport the ball from one side of the court to the other. You have to pass it there. So it takes time to transfer, to reverse the ball from one side of the court to the other. And so this is a very like simplified, but I think accurate version of how defenses try to operate in the modern NBA. I think Sengun's gift and what he's elite at is being able to connect one side of the court to the other. So he just understands like positioning, how to take advantage of the defense that's kind of shading and bending, especially when he's in the middle of the court and can dictate which side the ball goes to. He can bait, you know, defenders to kind of commit to one end and punish it, especially from the painted area, especially from the free throw line area. You know, he can pump one way and swing the other, dribble into like a DHO and then fake the handoff and then pass it back the way he came. I think he's just like a ball reversal, like God at this point. And I think it absolutely confuses defenses. It is one of the reasons why the Rockets are able to get away with playing multiple non-shooters on the court at the same time, able to get away with Amen Thompson effectively clogging up the dunker spot, like on almost every possession for them, while also having Sengun on the court, who is not a threat from 3-point range at this time. And I also think it's a major reason why his defense is so good. Like, he knows he can cheat towards one side. He knows when to gamble. He knows when to stay home. And it just allows him to position himself in the correct way. And so to me, that's a huge gift that Sengun has that affects both ends of the court. And I think in a lot of cases is why this Rockets team is able to be effective despite multiple guys, almost every single guy in their lineup being in and out, or every single guy in the rotation being in and out of the lineup. And I think it's due in large part to Sengun.
He does this one thing, and I feel like I'm going to sound cocky here. I feel like I'm going to be the first person to sort of introduce this concept, at least verbalize it this way.
That's exciting.
So if you're a tennis fan, and you're a serious tennis fan, you know that there's this concept called pattern changing that Andy Roddick introduced a few years ago. And if you're not a tennis fan, I'll tell you what it is. What pattern changing is, it's basically when you hit a forehand to the other person's forehand, the natural shot is for you to keep hitting it back and forth where the ball is coming from. That's where it is easiest to hit. So same goes for backhand. When you see two righties hitting backhands to each other, it's just because it's easier for you to hit a cross-court backhand to the backhand. You're more likely to hit it in. Andy Roddick once referred to Novak Djokovic as the greatest pattern changer of all time. And that was part of what made him so great is Novak Djokovic would get a cross-court forehand and rip it up the line. And the person wouldn't expect it because wouldn't expect him to change the pattern. You just assume the forehand was going back to the forehand. Alperen Sengun and Nikola Jokic, obviously Jokic is just the best at this, but Sengun, when the ball is moving, defenses get used to rotating to certain spots. There are patterns. It is almost a science. You're taught these principles and you become robots, basically. Oh, the ball's swinging around the perimeter and you're going to pass to the next guy. And you get taught these principles and these lessons. And this is just human nature. It's what 99% of players do. When the ball swings to Sengun, or he gets the ball in the short roll, and you expect him to pass it to a certain spot because the help is coming from a certain spot, he is going to change the pattern. And he is going to pump fake and find a new open guy, or he is going to pass it to a place that you don't expect. And that makes defending him hard, and it makes playing with him hard, because sometimes you'll catch a pass, or you'll make a cut, or you won't make a cut that he expects you to make. And it's just part of playing with a really brilliant player. And it's just something that once you see it, it really opens your eyes to just how special he is. And like you said, he's only 22 years old. I think one thing that Udoka has done, and I know we don't want to credit a coach too much, but on the spectrum of brilliance to tactically scientific, tactically sound, I think Sengun in the past, before Udoka showed up, leaned super heavily into the artist, into the improv, and just going out there and doing his thing. And I think that one thing Udoka has done is he's let him maintain that brilliance, but just sort of reeled him in a little bit, made him just a little bit more technically sound, especially on the defensive end of the court. And what we're seeing right now is just an amazing fringe all NBA player. I don't know how high we want to go, but he's been great, and I just wanted to give a shout out to that because it's just so much fun to watch him play.
Definitely, to me, fringe all NBA, and I love that analogy. So illustrative. I really love that, and I think it's totally spot on. And I think part of Sengun's ability to do that sort of pattern changing and just basically throwing defenses off again is why they're able to sort of get away with some of these lineups that in modern days really they shouldn't be able to. And those lineups are very successful, but when I say those lineups, again, I mean lineups where there are two either poor or non-shooters on the court at the same time. But that being said, maybe they're not as successful as we kind of would assume given the talent in those lineups. And what I'm alluding to is Amen Thompson being, in my opinion, one of the Rockets' best players. You know, you could argue he's their second or third best player, I think, pretty easily already at this point in his career, just given his defensive exploits and his ability to finish at the rim, and just his overall athleticism that everybody knows about at this point. That being said, if you incorporate either Tari Eason or Jabari Smith Jr. into the Rockets lineup, they do not miss a beat if they relative to whether they had Amen Thompson. With Jabari Smith Jr. in their starting lineup, Fred VanVleet, Jalen Green, Dillon Brooks, Jabari Smith Jr., Alperen Sengun. In 917 possessions, the Rockets are plus 8.3 per 100. And then Fred VanVleet, Jalen Green, Dillon Brooks, Tari Eason, Alperen Sengun, in only 170 possessions, they are plus 12.4 points per 100 possessions better than their opponent. So that's both lineups are extremely good, and that is without one of their top players in those lineups. So how do we explain that? And do you think there's something to this as it relates to what the Rockets should do moving forward? And also, I mean, I didn't even say this, but if we put Amen Thompson in there, then we have Fred VanVleet, Amen Thompson, Jalen Green, Dillon Brooks, and Alperen Sengun. I don't think a lot of people would recognize that in nearly 500 possessions, the Rockets are minus 8.5 per 100. So that is not good for a starting lineup at all. So yeah, what is your take on this, and what does it mean for them?
Yeah, it's interesting because what happened was Jabari Smith Jr. went out. The Rockets kept winning, and they kept playing well when Amen Thompson was on the court on the whole, because Udoka is so good at staggering. He's not like running the starting lineup into the ground. But the starting lineups quietly got a lot worse, took a huge... And I think what that tells us is against starters, and at least right now, against starters, and specifically in a playoff environment when you're going to be scouted against, you're going to want the opponents are going to hone in on your weaknesses. You just need that fourth shooter at least with Sengun. When Sengun is your primary offensive engine. You want him surrounded by as many options as possible. This isn't to say that Amen Thompson in the dunker spot, Amen Thompson creating offense from the perimeter, Amen Thompson's insane defensive ability and his ability to create transition opportunities pretty much just out of dust. These things are all amazingly valuable right now. This bears out in the impact data right now. He's not just like a negative player because he can't shoot. He's a very valuable player right now. But I think that right now his best role is in that 25 to 30 minute per game range off the bench, splitting, not full stagger, but playing some with Sengun against bench units, and then some hopefully with a little bit more shooting off the bench. And you want either Jabari Smith Jr. or maybe even just Tari Eason in the starting lineup. I know that in Houston circles, or at least I think, Houston fans comment below and correct me if I'm wrong, I think right now the debates are Jabari Smith Jr. versus Amen Thompson as the fifth starter, but I don't know how many people are talking about Tari Eason. He's so good at basketball, XJ. He's incredible. I think there's a solid argument for him being the fifth starter.
That would be my choice. I think Tari Eason is right now one of the most underrated players in the league right now. Just given everything that he adds, I think that, I mean, you and I talk about this a lot. Guys that don't have the makings of, you know, an elite first option, an off the dribble guy, or a guy who's going to create for themselves either via the dribble or in the post, who's going to create for others via collapsing defenses and driving and kicking. Guys who don't do those things just often get underrated, especially when they're really, really good at everything else. And Tari Eason is almost elite at everything else. He's a great on-ball defender, great off-ball helper, great at defending the post, can protect the rim a little bit, can knock down shots when he's open. Is just a menace all around. And so I think he basically complements that starting lineup so well, in honestly even better than Jabari Smith Jr., given that Alperen Sengun's rim protection numbers are really good this year, actually. And so I do think with having, you know, Tari Eason, you are not losing as much as you would going from Amen Thompson in terms of the perimeter defense and something that's so critical to what Houston does, which is keeping ball handlers out of the paint, making life difficult for them. You now have Tari Eason, Dylan Brooks, and Fred VanVleet. Good luck.
One thought I'd love to add to that is, and this might be controversial, I hope it's not, I love Steven Adams. Seems like a hilarious guy. All-time rebounder. I saw some tweet the other day that was like, the 3 of the top 5 rebounding teams of the last 15 years have been 3 different franchises that Steven Adams was on, the Grizzlies, Thunder, and now the Rockets.
That's so
he's just a vacuum when it comes to rebounding. I'm skeptical at how playable he's going to be in a big-time playoff series. And what does that mean? We know Udoka is going to want to maintain rim protection and size. He's not going to want to go super small. Making Eason the 5th starter allows Jabari Smith Jr. to play a little bit next to Sengun as a backup power forward, but also be their full-time backup center and have him as the lone big in all the non-Sengun minutes. I think it makes that rotation a little bit easier and a little bit more natural. If you start Eason and have Amen Thompson and Jabari Smith Jr. coming off the bench. And with Jabari Smith Jr. at center, now all of a sudden you have Amen Thompson and 3 other wings or guards who can shoot. Amen Thompson's your only non-shooter when Sengun's on the bench. What does that lineup look like? That lineup with Amen Thompson as the only non-shooter, you get all of Amen Thompson's strengths amplified, and I think it's easier to mute his weakness a little bit more. So I think it's a win-win here if you start Eason and put Jabari Smith in that backup center role, and then let him, in the games he's cooking, slide down to power forward next to Sengun.
Yeah, our audience really wants us to disagree more. So, unfortunately, this is not the day, because I totally agree with you. I think that's all exactly on point. You know what though, XJ?
if we just spend eternity agreeing with each other, that just must mean because we're so right. Like people have to come flock to our show. We're just right all the time. We're wrong just as much as anyone else, and we hone up to it. That's what we do here.
We'll just be wrong together. That's
Yeah.
the thing. Well, yeah, I would love to hear from Rockets fans what they think about this because you all watch the team every day. We watch a ton of basketball. Jeff watches more basketball than any person I know or have ever met, really. So, we watch as much as we can, but you guys watch them every day. What do you think about our kind of breakdown and analysis of this team, and how excited are you about them moving forward? If it's your first time here, please subscribe. This is Hot Hand Theory. We talk hoops and break things down from an analytical perspective, as I said in the beginning. And we also respond to every single comment. We're just trying to continue to create an ongoing conversation, a community where we talk about basketball, have really thoroughly well thought out opinions and perspectives, and are able to share those things. And hopefully we come up with some new ideas together that other people aren't necessarily talking about, just based off of having input from so many different people. So drop a comment if you are here and a Rockets fan or not a Rockets fan or anything, and we will respond to you and try to get that conversation going. But for Jeff, I'm XJ, and this has been Hot Hand Theory.